Episode 3, Breaking Kayfabe with Bowdrin and Barry. What's happening, my man Barry Rose?
Living the dream, my friend. Episode 3, the American public gets to see our faces.
Rocking a little Steve McQueen bullet t-shirt. Today, we are going back to the A, to quote Paul McCartney on one of his albums, as we are doing a little pro wrestling talk, Barry Rose. Oh my God. And I can tell you, real quick, before we started recording, I actually watched AEW Dynamite last night. Strong episode. Some good stuff there. I just want to give a shout out since we always kind of crap on AEW. I actually thought it was a very good episode. Barry Rose, of course, not watching AEW recently. Barry said, for the last 6 months, anything happened in your life 6 months ago, Barry Rose, that might have coincided with a recent lack of interest in pro wrestling? I can't imagine what. So we'll be talking a little pro wrestling. We'll be talking a little action movies because, we always love talking a good action movie. But as a surprise for Barry Rose, he does not know this. No, it's not me exposing the nude pictures of Barry that I have. It is, in fact, the return, Barry Rose, Florida Man or not.
Oh,
Yes, special
wow.
shout out and thanks to our man David Edelman for hooking us up. But before we do all that, Barry Rose, let's do a little pro wrestling talk. Barry Rose, you threw something out to me last night. I did a little time studying, researching, as I always do. Barry Rose, you offered up to me, you said, tell me five guys that never won the world championship that were deserving. Now we're talking. Let's be honest. We're not talking about the WWE and the WCW days. We're talking territorial wise. So
Yes.
Barry Rose, do you have five names you can offer up to the good listener
Yeah,
that
absolutely
should?
too. And when we talk about the five names and with the territory days, I think what we're also referencing is that we're talking about five guys that probably could have held the NWA World's Heavyweight title, possibly AWA or WWF, WWWF. But I think for the most part, we're probably thinking NWA. And I did come up with five guys. I wonder how much overlap we're going to have with this. So what I did was I tried to take it in a direction. I wasn't thinking political. Like, of course, in hindsight, we know that certain guys would never get the title based off of political reasons. But I tried to think of it as a fan in the stands. Who would be five guys that I would have found as believable world heavyweight champions? Five guys who deserved it. First on my list, I know that he makes your list. He would have to. Johnny Valentine.
Hold on, I'm checking my list. Yes, he's on my list.
Yeah, I think and he's like one of those names that everybody brings up, and I know that he's held forms of a world title. I think it was the Pedro Martinez or Antonio Inoki NWF, but we really are talking about the big three of the '60s and '70s. So to me, Johnny Valentine was the guy, and it also makes me wonder, and I don't see him ever winning the world title because I believe when he went down in the plane crash, I want to say he was 47 years old. So, not saying that they wouldn't have put the title on him at that age, but I just don't see that happening. But it's certainly a guy that was deserving from a fan standpoint of having the world title, Jeff.
Well, very famously, this is not the first time we've ever said this phrase, but Johnny Valentine, famous for saying, I can't convince you that pro wrestling is real, but I can make you believe that I'm real.
Yeah.
I think he absolutely, so he's absolutely deserving of this spot. The way I approached it, slightly different from yours. I didn't want to do the whole, this guy's a great worker, so he should have been world champion, because you do have to factor in number one, the politics of pro wrestling, which at the time that we're talking about here, which, as you said, 60s and 70s, maybe early 80s, definitely had to play a role in who would have been considered as a world champion. I do want to equate in some form the ability to work. I also, of course, want to include, is this guy a draw? Is this a guy that is respected by the promoters? I had to factor in a bunch of different things rather than just, wow, this guy can go out and put on a 4.5 to 5 star match every night or work really good with the enhancement talent on TV at the TV tapings. I wanted to include. So I'll tell you, the first guy that I had on my list, Barry Rose, is a guy that later got lots of acclaim as the $1 Million Man, but well before he was the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase was the guy that not only was on top in Georgia, but for Bill Watson in Mid South. Excuse me, my boy Snap decided to step into the office, but also was a big deal in St. Louis when St. Louis was the number one spot in the country. He also did his stint in the WWF as the very first, I believe, was it North American champion or Intercontinental champion? You remember, Bear?
It was North American champion. I went around 79, which then I think became the Intercontinental title.
Yeah, not to be confused with the title that Pat Patterson famously won in that tournament in Rio de Janeiro, Barry.
I was there. I saw that.
He
I
went
saw
down.
that
It took place, as I remember, during the middle of Carnivals. I think it was '79, and
I had ringside tickets in
yes,
Rio. So yeah.
yes. I think Pat Patterson, got the Patterson leg lock on Carl Gotch in the finals. I think that's what it was. So, all right, Barry Rose, who would be your number two dose person that should have been?
First off, DiBiase, great selection. Was not on my list, but that's probably more reflective of me not thinking about DiBiase. Deserves to be on the list.
I will say this, we may have some doubling up because, as I said, Johnny Valentine was on my list, but there were some people that were absolutely deserving that, to be honest with you, I didn't put him on my list because I said this is a guy that Barry's going to put on his list. So I'm always a giver, Barry. I'm always a giver.
But
so
with that, you are. But DiBiase too, to me, prototype NWA World's Heavyweight Champion.
Absolutely
could have been. Yeah, in the early '80s, he could have been thrown into the mix. I think, and it was political for DiBiase. He just wasn't connected to that side at that point.
Well, and let's be honest. Famously, there was the the incident with Sam Muchnick, where he went up and made a comment about how the crowds were down in Georgia, and I think the reference was they were the shits or something like that, and he made the comment to Muchnick, who went back and reported it to Barnett, and all of a sudden the plans to have DiBiase Flair in the early '80s do a program suddenly turned into Dusty Rhodes and Flair. At least that's part of wrestling legend. So, yeah, you're right. I think Sam Muchnick's thought of I'm just about ready to kind of tap out as a promoter here and take my retirement and that kind of thing. I think ultimately that really hurt DiBiase as much as anybody because I think with the rise of Dusty Rhodes, not only creatively but still holding that drawing ability, it's sort of the rise of Dusty led to the decline of Ted DiBiase, at least in the eyes of NWA promoters. What do you say?
100%. And DiBiase was a guy. I mean, the truth is, he is a great selection when you stop and think about it. Not only could he get so much heat as both a babyface and a heel, he was able to get the crowd all riled up. He had a look of a professional wrestler.
Yes.
He just everything about him, and obviously the quality of his matches, his promos. He was probably a guy that, if he had been politically connected in some form or shit had not gone down, he definitely wasn't one of Dusty's guys. That's for sure. There's a great chance he could have been NWA World's Heavyweight Champion. There wasn't a flaw in the game of Ted DiBiase.
And we're talking about all this, and this is Ted DiBiase before he famously did the turn on JYD. This is just strictly Ted DiBiase as a babyface. And you know what, Barry Rose? Because I am nothing if not the king of segues, as we have established. There's going to be somewhere else that Ted DiBiase is going to be where we could potentially talk about this.
We could. So Ted DiBiase is going to be gracing us with his $1 Million presence on October the 25th of this year in the beautiful Tampa suburb of Lutz. We are having Glory Days GrappleCon 3. Ted DiBiase, our headliner, will also be headlining a WrestleMania discussion panel, which will be very exciting. But really excited. You can meet Ted DiBiase. You can get tickets at tixtree.com. But Manny Fernandez will be there. B. Brian Blair is going to be there. We're going to have somewhere around 20 different superstars there. Wendy Richter, Leilani Kai, Bill Apter. Just so excited about this, Jeff, and it's coming up. So my second name was one that I gave a lot of thought to, and it was Buddy Colt. And Buddy is uh, taken on that Bobby Shane, Bruiser Brody type of cult like following post his career. Buddy has since passed on, but uh, Buddy, once his career was over, was one of those guys that was just larger than life. He was kind of like an Elvis figure, a guy whose career was cut shorter, that there was still more time for him. And Buddy, as a heel, was fantastic. Now, what I can't say is how would Buddy have been as a babyface, because that's where I don't really see that. He just, came off to me as this kind of smug, smarmy heel. But I think Buddy Colt had everything going. I don't know if he was a long term world heavyweight champion for the NWA in the 70s. His career ended to basically February the 11th of 1975 when the plane crash occurred. Bobby Shane lost his life. Buddy Colt, Gary Hart, and Iron Mike McCord, who later became Austin Idol. But I think a short-term champion of maybe 6 to 8 months, maybe a year, with Buddy Colt could have been in the works. It could have happened. He certainly kind of had the total package, that's for sure.
So, Buddy Colt was absolutely one of those guys that I left off my list because I knew you would talk about him. Uh, Buddy Colt as a babyface is something, you're right, I don't really know how that works because I have to be honest with you. As much as I love Buddy Colt as a heel before the plane crash, Buddy Colt, after he retired, and didn't he do a stint where you made him a manager or they made him a manager in CWF Bear?
Yeah, and I will say to that, I even want to say he even wrestled one or two matches. They were, Buddy couldn't really even walk at that point. So these were more get in the ring, throw a punch, get out of the ring type of matches.
Yeah.
But he was a heel manager of King Curtis, and then King Curtis and Buddy Colt turned babyface. And Buddy, that was pretty much it for Buddy. He didn't do much more after that. Then became a commentator. Uh, it never, to me, he wasn't a great comment. That's not a knock on him either. He just wasn't a great commentator. I always felt Buddy's true calling was a heel. He was great. He was arguably one of the best heels we ever saw. Uh, Everything else really didn't work out as well, but I don't think that was a fault of Buddy in a lot of ways.
Well, and quite frankly, that was one of the points I was going to bring up was how I felt ineffective he was as Gordon's sidekick because that natural heel that wanted to come out couldn't, and he had to sit there and uh, he was calling the shots in the ring and offering his commentary, but he couldn't do it with that bully tough guy former Marine thing that made him so effective as a heel. And when we talk about Buddy Colt, you were talking about guy, well, he would have been a good short-term NWA champion. When I also figured out some of these names, I also figured not only the NWA but the AWA and the WWF. And because you sit there and you think about guys that were short-term champions in the WWF in the 70s. You had Ivan Koloff, you had Stan Stasiak, and then you had Billy Graham's was a little bit longer. His was about 9 months. But then you had the Iron Sheik, and you sit there and you think to yourself, boy, no offense to those three guys because I love Ivan Koloff and the and Sheiky Baby of course was tremendous. Stan Stasiak, though, just to me struck me as a really kind of really. There's nobody else you can get, and I know Kevin Orcutt, out there in Oregon, who's still watching us. Shout out to you, Kevin. We appreciate you always supporting us. But really, there's nobody better that you could have gotten than Stan Stasiak to hold the strap for 2 weeks before Bruno come back into the picture. And as I sit there and look at our list, and I'm sure I kind of know some of the names that you're going to feature. These are guys that I think, could have been a way better short-term world champion than Stan Stasiak or maybe even, because, Koloff had been in the WWF one time before that, but he wasn't like a huge name that, people saw as, oh, this could be the guy that takes down Bruno, and Iron Sheik, Bob Backlund was definitely, had kind of tapped out with the audience up there. I really believe they had kind of, he had fallen out of favor. So there was a guy, the time was right for them to give it short term, and you had Hogan coming in. So let's see who we're going to bring in. And really, you couldn't give it to somebody other than, the Sheik. I just think there were better people out there that would have made better candidates. So in that spot, Buddy Colt, or Johnny Valentine would have, I thought, made better representations as short term champions. I get it with Johnny Valentine. There might have been the consideration of this is a guy that sort of, walked his own path, and there might have been a little trepidation from promoters to put the strap on a guy like Johnny Valentine, who, let's be candid, was kind of a tough guy. And if you told Johnny we want you to lay down, and Johnny decided, nah, tonight's not a good night for me, brother, that might have played into the equation. But Buddy Colt, I think, without a doubt, Barry, you're spot on. I think he could have been a great short-term champion before the plane crash. That bully heel, and he was almost. I think he kind of personified. I'm going to kind of go on a limb here, Barry. Tell me what you think. He, in a lot of ways, personified the bully heel, maybe even better than Ole Anderson. What do you think about that, Barry?
Yeah, well, so I think he did in some ways, he was a little more subtle. To me, Ole was so overt with that whole bully type of heel. Buddy Colt was a little sneakier also, which I also liked. But the cool thing with Buddy Colt was, if you remember, he had that sneer. Buddy would smile as he was jamming the thumb, and he would smile at the crowd. So he had a way. To me, Ole was, Ole was Ole. Buddy Colt was at a different level than Ole was, for sure.
Yeah. So my next guy, Barry. Again, I thought about guys who worked in different territories, who were over in different territories, who could carry that strap, and people would think to themselves, this is a guy that you could see as world champion. Hold on, pause the cause. Speaking of pause, shout out to my boy Snap there, decided he wanted to leave. My next choice, Barry Rose, I don't know if he's on your list, but Wahoo McDaniel. A guy that was a draw literally in every single territory that he was ever in. Huge draw in Houston. Spent his time up in Minnesota with Vern, where he was a big draw up there, and his matches with Wahoo and some other programs. And this was a guy that if you gave Wahoo McDaniel the world title, he would have come off as extremely credible, I think. Because this was not a guy to be trifled with. And if Wahoo McDaniel was, hoisting an adult beverage in a bar, and someone decided to let him know that they didn't think pro wrestling was real, Wahoo McDaniel was going to let him know that pro wrestling was very real. Barry Rose, what do you think, Wahoo McDaniel?
Love it. So Wahoo was my number sixth choice. He just missed my top five, but he was there. And the truth was, Wahoo, what you just said was exactly the way that fans, because we were fans back then, still are, that's the way that fans were viewing Wahoo. He was credible. No, we would joke that we would go see matches in West Palm Beach and sit in the leaky teepee, and you could be all the way up top and you could hear Wahoo's chops when he would wrestle like Mr. Saito. He was credible. Everybody believed Wahoo was a tough guy. There was no doubt about it. Nobody was going to try anything with Wahoo, and if you did, the stories were legendary of what was going to happen to you. The other thing was, a lot of fans will remember Wahoo later in his career, like working in the AWA when he was much slower and older guy. Wahoo in his heyday was fucking spectacular. He was really a main event guy. He had a great stint here in the state of Florida, and he was the number two babyface right behind Dusty Rhodes. Arguably, he was right there with Dusty. Wahoo was so over when he was here. Huge fan as a choice. Didn't make my top five, but he made my number six, Jeff, and I love that.
He was also, people forget, Wahoo's an incredible athlete. I mean,
Yeah.
the whole stories about him, what do you call, doing a marathon or something, walking from one town to another, and just, he played, in the AFL for the Jets. for many years, and for the Dolphins towards the end of his career. This was not just a guy that showed up one day and said, "I want to be a wrestler." This was a guy that was a legitimate athlete, legitimate wrestler, legitimate tough guy, and a top draw babyface in every territory: Texas, Mid Atlantic, Florida. The one place he didn't go is New York, and that was because the famous Italian Indian Chief Jay Strongbow may have already been up there. I think Wahoo did. Right off the top of your head, did he not go up there? I want to say mid '60s. Does that
He
sound?
was. So yeah, that was which was prior Strongbow. So he was up there in the 60s. I think he might have been, he was part of the New York Jets, if I'm correct. And I
Yes.
think that was the whole connection of why he was up in the Northeast.
Yeah. All right. So your third choice, Barry.
And that was excellent. So my third choice was a guy that I think a lot of people in the 1970s thought was going to get a short run. Years later, not even years later, probably during that era, we kind of realized, okay, he can't. And there's Dick Murdoch. And Dick Murdoch, while he didn't look necessarily like a world's champion, he was a tall, lanky guy, had a massive beer gut. But Dick Murdoch, and this is taking out personal things. Dick Murdoch in the 1970s was capable of giving you one of the best matches you would ever see one night, and the next night would do a pure comedy spot. And apparently there was consistency with Murdoch, and he was known as a hellraiser. He was a guy that was drinking and just raising fucking hell every night. But there was a period where Dick Murdoch was the Missouri heavyweight champion. And the way it was portrayed, the Missouri title was just one step below the NWA World's Heavyweight Champion. And if you were the Missouri champion, you were considered the number one challenger to the NWA World's title. So there were a lot of rumors going around that Murdoch was going to win the title. I don't think anybody saw it as long term. But it was kind of maybe the Tommy Rich deal where, you get it for a week or so, or Giant Baba, as Giant Baba did in Japan. But there was a big rumor going around that Murdoch was going to get the title, and people were believing that. Fans were believing it. That's the kind of credibility that Murdoch had in fans' eyes back.
Well, and as I said when I first began talking about this list, you have to take into account also, what did promoters think about the guy? Did they trust him? All that kind of stuff. Of course, there is the political aspect now that in retrospect, 50 years later, Dick Murdoch may have been a completely politically incorrect choice. However, with the benefit of looking at this from the eyes of someone in 1975, say, or 1980, Dick Murdoch, as a short-term world champion, would have been completely acceptable. No one would have argued it. Maybe Dusty might have argued it because Dusty would have said, "Well, just put me in that slot." But in the Tommy Rich slot, Dick Murdoch, and Dick Murdoch, maybe for some of the reasons I outlined, never got that run up in New York. Because if you think about it, Dick Murdoch, yeah, I think he would have been I've never even mentioned this before, Barry. I think he would have made a hell of a challenger for Bob Backlund in the early part of Bob Backlund's run. Dick Murdoch going up there as the redneck Dick Murdoch could have brought out some incredible matches with Bob Backlund. And what do you think, Bob Backlund versus Dick Murdoch? How do you think that would have gotten over?
So you and I have talked about missed opportunities for Backlund, and I know Joe LeDuc is a name that we always bring up. I think King Curtis might even be another one. Though King Curtis, his run in wrestling effectively ended by 1979. But could you imagine a super redneck Dick Murdoch in New? To me, and this is not a knock on Sweet Hansen, but imagine if it was Sweet Hansen with a lot more talent, who was a challenger. Bring in Dick Murdoch. Dick Murdoch beats the shit out of Backlund, uses the cowbell, then just lays his fucking chewing tobacco all over him. Missed opportunity right there. That would have been great.
The brain gives him the brain buster. I mean, that would have led to an epic program. Yeah. Now,
Please.
now, all of a sudden, Barry Rose, I'm seeing dollar signs there that Vince Senior decided to pass over. So let's get to my third choice. My third choice, and again, I didn't necessarily look strictly within the eyes of the NWA. I was looking at guys that could have also been short-term world champions, in the AWA or the WWF, a guy that appeared in all these territories, a guy that was sort of, and I was also, by the way, looking at this through the eyes of more the 1960s into, let's say, the mid 1970s. A guy that was sort of Ric Flair before Ric Flair, Barry Rose. That is the crippler Ray Stevens. And Ray Stevens, legend has it, was the guy, along with Roy Shire, that basically created San Francisco wrestling. Pat Patterson joined a few years after that, and they just had this amazing run. But for a guy that was literally cared nothing about his physical well being, based on some of his out of the ring activities, but Ray Stevens, one of the most amazing talents in wrestling at this time, and a guy that was so well thought of that when they did the Battle Royal out in San Francisco, Bruno came out to do the Battle Royal, and Ray Stevens ended up winning, and that was a very rare non-victory. I won't call it a loss because it was a Battle Royal, but Bruno even, willing to accept that Ray Stevens, because I remember that was the big headline in the After magazines was, Bruno's out there for the Battle Royal, and Ray Stevens was the one that went over. He goes to the AWA, becomes one of their tag team champions. Is a big deal there. He, of course, later in his career went to the WWF. He did the famous angle with Jimmy Snuka that led to Jimmy Snuka's babyface turn. He also did a run in Mid-Atlantic, again, later in his career. I think he was the tag team champion there. I'm trying to think who he was a tag team champion with. Was it Valentine?
Jimmy Snuka in Mid-Atlantic was Jimmy Snuka.
Okay. But so literally a guy. And what kind of run did Ray Stevens have in Florida, Barry?
So he had a bunch. Ray Stevens, first off, Ray Stevens' career in the state of Florida may have been the longest career of anybody. And I found that Ray Stevens was working in the 1950s for CWF. He actually was on the first ever aired televised CWF card on television, which would have been the 1950s. And then Ray Stevens would pop up. He was back in 76. Came in as a heel, had a young Jimmy Garvin called Bo James.
That's right, yeah.
Manager. Then came back in 1979 as a babyface, teamed with Mike Graham, held the Florida Tag Team titles. Then came back 2.5, 3 years later as a heel. Came back as a heel. And look at that direction, Jeff. Is that incredible?
That's me. And he's a producer, but I'm doing the directing, baby.
There it is. So came back as a heel, and I think was the Florida TV champion, but literally had a runs and see. He was the guy. And look, the thing when you say Ray Stevens, he's at that level of arguably the most respected guys ever in the business, right? Ray Stevens would have to be there because his peers had the ultimate, as you just said, fucking Bruno Sammartino. Ray had the respect of his peers. And he is another guy that a lot of people would have said, Ray Stevens should have been world's heavyweight champion. Absolutely should have been. He could do it all. He, babyface, heel, interviews, and had an understanding of the business that I think few people ever had, probably.
I think the one caveat to Ray Stevens is that it was just years before Ric Flair was such a draw that promoters didn't care about what he did outside the ring. I worry that Ray Stevens, from just say the 65 through 75 window, if he was to be considered, they had to take into account, because those promoters talk to one another, right? That's no big surprise. You worry whether or not if this guy was being considered, whether it was a short-term NWA or a short-term, say, AWA slot, were they going, I can't imagine Vern, trusting this guy with his belt, even if it was for a month or two, because he would have heard, oh, this guy, he's out there on his motorcycles, he's out there racing go-karts, he's doing, he's hell raising in the bars and stuff like that. And this is something.
Fucking the roller derby queen.
Yeah. There you go.
Fucking love Ray Stevens, right?
But, this was not a guy that was going to provide, just to compare and contrast, like Nick Bockwinkel. That Nick Bockwinkel was going to be provide a stable, champion. You weren't going to worry about the guy doing something reckless, as opposed to Ray Stevens. Vern would have made Ray Stevens world champion, and every night he was going to sit on his couch when he wasn't wrestling, worry, am I going to get a phone call from a cop saying, Stevens has been arrested for drunk driving? Stevens got caught, screwing the sheriff's wife somewhere. That would have been the one caveat to making Ray Stevens world champion. And the other thing, because this would have been something to consider. Ray Stevens was really only about 5'8.5", I think, or 5'9". He did not present a huge physical presence that some promoters would have liked. So go ahead.
At that point, I took a photo with Ray Stevens, and I think I'm 15 years old, probably 2 or 3 months away from 16, and I'm already taller than Ray Stevens in that photo. And I'm not, what am I? I'm barely 6 foot right now, so it wasn't like I was 8 feet tall at that point.
Now, are you counting the afro that you had back then, Barry?
Well, I was an additional foot with the afro.
That's
absolutely.
true. You definitely had you had the what do you call the Angela Davis fro? That is a really old school reference there. So Barry Rose, who you got next?
And that was excellent, by the way. My next one is Dick Slater. Now, there are 2 Dick Slaters, and the first Dick Slater was Dick Slater. The second Dick Slater was the guy that really wanted to be Terry Funk. And a lot of people would talk about it, that Slater, before he wanted to be Terry Funk, was really an incredible worker, but he did take a lot of his mannerisms. A lot of what he was doing was based off of Terry Funk, but Slater had a run here in 1978, and he had been a babyface, had been gone for a year or 2, came back and turned heel in his first match back, which was on television, and it was a scientific matchup, Pedro Morales defending the Southern title against Dick Slater. He turns heel in the match, he wins the title. Morales is gone within a week or 2. It was a great transition with that. But he went on a run then as a wrestling heel. And I love that. To me, these were my favorite. I loved wrestling heels. Guys that would get out there, they're heels, but they're still wrestlers. They're not necessarily brawlers. So really loved it. And he had a run. He also held the Florida television title at the same time. He had 2 belts, two different championships in the state of Florida, meaning that the promotion was really, really high on Slater. Shortly after that, he wound up winning the Missouri title. And as we talked about with Murdoch, you win the Missouri title, you're in contention. Slater looked like a world champion. He was a legitimate tough guy that promoters obviously could have trusted that nobody's going to shoot on him in the ring and try to steal that title. But Slater was also unpredictable. He had a little bit of that Murdoch, had a little bit of that Ray Stevens, a little bit of that Johnny Valentine. He was a rebel. He was in his heyday, Slater was an amazing professional wrestler. But was he a guy that you could count on, was going to show up every night and do that? And I don't know if he was that guy.
2 things, Barry Rose. Number one, Dick Slater, I think you and I, without getting into it too deeply here, there was kind of a dark side to Dick Slater,
Absolutely.
And I think if promoters did talk to one another and they heard stories outside the ring, if those stories got back, again, these are promoters who are wanting to, even if it's short term, we're going to put the world title on you. We have to be able to trust you. And would they be willing to do that with someone who they had heard those out of the ring stories with about Dick Slater? The other thing is, Dick Slater was an absolutely amazing talent, but Dick Slater, from what I've always read and heard, was really you used the Terry Funk analogy that he became Terry Funk and started using all of his mannerisms. I've always heard also that Dick Slater had a motorcycle accident, I want to say somewhere in the latter part of the 70s when he was working in Georgia, and they said that physically and in the ring he adjusted a lot of his style because after the motorcycle accident he really wasn't the same wrestler. What have you heard about that, Barry?
Yeah, I believe so. I believe I've heard this story. I forget exactly what year. I think a lot of it too. Look, he became Terry Funk even earlier. It was a slower transition But Slater was one of those guys. There's a couple of matches that are out there on YouTube. Slater started in 1972. These matches are 1973. He's already fucking incredible. Like, you're talking about guys that literally right out of the gate were fantastic, and Dick Slater was one of those guys. How many guys can you say literally right out of the gate? To me, there weren't a million of them. Kurt Angle was one, and we're talking then, what, 2 decades later, 3 decades later. Slater was one of those guys, and Slater never, in my opinion, never really got better. I think by the early 80s, he was kind of, and it probably was the motorcycle. And I know he had horrible, horrible back issues that later in life had confined him to a wheelchair before he passed away. But if you were able to see Dick Slater, and again, I think a lot of people remember Dick Slater as the Rebel in the WWE, which would have been around 86, 87, which was terrible.
Yeah, he was awful. Yeah.
Oh, it was brutal. And then Dick's, in his career, I think at that point, as a really effective wrestler, was probably over. He became part of a tag team with Dick Murdoch called the Hardliners in WCW, but he wasn't the same guy. Dick Slater in the 1970s, wow, what a fucking worker this guy was.
I think his last big run was as Bill Watts' North American champion around
Yeah.
1985, early 86, right before the Mid South became UWF. That's when he had Dark Journey as his valet, because Bill Watts and his mindset was a white guy having a black girl as his, as his baby face was going to be natural heat. This was some of the philosophies of wrestling promoters back then. I remember that when Butch Reed went up to the WWF and they had him bleach his hair. The philosophy I read was that a black guy having blonde hair is going to naturally get him heat. These are some of the stupid things that promoters used to think of. So my number four guy, Barry, a guy that you already referenced, is Johnny Valentine. So I won't go too deep into the weeds here on that. But Johnny Valentine, just as the physical presence that he presented, and like talk about a guy that if you make him a short-term champion and you want to transition to another guy, like just as an example, okay, if they had Bruno lose the title, or I'm sorry, Pedro Morales lose the title to Johnny Valentine, okay, this would have been 1973, latter part of 73. Bruno comes back and Johnny Valentine has destroyed Pedro Morales, whose run is now up, did about a 2-year run. Bruno comes back, and Bruno defeats Johnny Valentine, the guy that vanquished Pedro Morales. Automatically, not that Bruno needed anything to get himself over, but imagine Bruno having vanquished Johnny Valentine, and then they could have done a couple of rematches, through the loop. And that would have been incredible money, incredible draw. And Johnny Valentine, I think, would have made an amazing transitional world champion from Pedro to Bruno. Your thoughts?
Oh, I mean, without a doubt, Johnny Valentine at any point in any promotion as a transitional or even champion would have made perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
So missed opportunity, absolutely, for the WWF or Triple WF. But even the AWA, and I don't remember Valentine spending a lot of time in the AWA, possibly he did in the 60s, but in the 70s, I don't think he made it up there at all. And I think there might have been a fear in some ways, like, if we give Valentine, as you said, it's not going to be so easy to take a strap off of him if he doesn't want to agree to it, right? Legitimate tough guy. Apparently a legitimate tough guy who was both a sadist and a masochist.
Yeah.
That you could beat the shit out of Johnny Valentine and he would just stand there and stare you down.
Yeah. He in a way got off on guys like Wahoo just chopping the living hell out of him. You said that. I really can't remember Johnny Valentine ever having a run up in the AWA area during the 60s, 70s, and maybe it was a case of Vern, like, as much as he would have loved the money that Johnny would have drawn, because you think about it, they could have taken that Johnny Valentine Wahoo thing up to the AWA too, or, a guy that Vern trusted, Red Bastien, had a program with Johnny Valentine that was legendary. He could have worked with either one of those guys, and for whatever reason, he didn't. So, Barry Rose, your last guy.
Yeah, and I should say too, with Johnny Valentine, about I believe it was June of 1975, he had his last match ever in CWF. I believe the plane crash for him was maybe in October of that year, which was the infamous plane crash that Flair was on and Bob Bruggers was on, a referee, I believe. Maybe David Crockett was, Tim Woods was on that plane. I forget exactly who it was, but that's where Valentine broke his back. But the respect of Johnny Valentine was he hadn't worked in Florida in probably 2 years. And 2 years later, he's getting a world title shot in Tampa, which was a one-off against Jack Briscoe, knowing that fans go, shit, it's Johnny Valentine. He's got a great chance of winning. Did not win, obviously did the job that night. And I don't think he did a ton of jobs, Johnny Valentine, but he was a guy that had the respect of everybody, fans, peers, didn't matter, promoters. Last guy on my list, this one is a personal one, Billy Robinson. Now, Billy Robinson, to me, my favorite professional wrestler of all time, Terry Funk being number two, but Billy was number one. And the first time I ever saw him, which would have been 75, when he came to CWF and had a run, he was doing stuff I had never seen before. His style of wrestling, which was that British style of wrestling, I had seen part of it, Les Thornton, Tony Charles, but Billy Robinson really personified that style, and I loved it. I always wondered, and I think a lot of people, and you've heard it a million times, why didn't he ever get a run with the AWA title? And I believe it was in the obituary that Meltzer in The Observer was that Robinson was not a guy who was drawing people to the arenas. And I think that's what he had said. And I don't know if that's true or not. I'm assuming it is true because I can't think of another reason why. And I always felt for a guy that was so loyal to Vern in the AWA that you would have thought, it basically went, Vern and Bockwinkel. Why not throw Robinson in the mix, at least briefly in some form? And I'm not talking, by the time you were at Larry Zbyszko and Kurt Henninger or whoever it was in the 80s, but in the 1970s, possibly up to the early 80s, Robinson was a very, very viable contender. He was an amazing professional wrestler, a decent promo. There's a lot worse promos than Robinson. But again, I've always heard, or at least Meltzer said, that he just wasn't a draw, and I'd have to assume that that's the reason why.
Well, Vern had to give the title to Otto Vons instead of Billy Robinson. Let's be honest.
Right. The great Otto Vons.
I have to believe, because for years in the AWA, before Bockwinkel came up there, Vern versus Billy Robinson was their headline program at all their big shows. So, as much as you would sit there and say, well, did Vern really trust him enough to give him a short run with the title? He trusted him enough to make him his number one challenger for all those years, but maybe it was just that, I don't want to give him that time, because think about guys that Vern, because it was his promotion, wouldn't trust with the belts. Billy Robinson, Hogan, all these other guys that were viable contenders that Vern just wouldn't trust them to do a short-term program with. And go figure, Vern went out of business, because he had that lack of trust and he couldn't give it to the next guy that was going to carry the promotion into the future. And that was part of his problem. So my last guy, Barry Rose, is a guy that spent a lot of time in Florida, guy that went up to the AWA, guy that had a legendary run in the WWF. So a guy that was a headliner in every single territory he was ever in, a guy that was known for his toughness, also known, quite frankly, for being a bully. But I think if you were looking for a short-term world champion, Cowboy Bill Watts, a guy who apparently was so pissed off that he was not made world champion, he decided to go buy his own promotion and make himself the champion there for a long term. But a guy that was a visionary promoter from a lot of stuff that he learned from not only Eddie. I think he learned a lot from Eddie Graham. He also probably learned from Vern. He probably also learned a lot from Vince Sr. Cowboy Bill Watts. What do you think, Barry Rose?
Yeah, and I think, again, here was a guy. So if anything, he wasn't the technical wrestler that a lot of world champions were, but he falls into the bully heel. I would have absolutely, in a believable bully heel and almost a frightening bully heel in some ways. And his psychology in promos, out of this world. If you go back now and you listen to Bill Watts doing commentary as a heel in Florida from 1974, it transitions to today, some 50 years later, 51, 52 years later. Bill Watts had it all. He was a believable, scary professional wrestler that you believed could kick the ass of anybody. This wasn't a chicken shit heel, that's for sure. This was a guy that you believed could kick the ass of anybody. I love Bill Watts. I don't know if Bill Watts would have been long term,
No.
but I'm also not sure that Bill Watts wouldn't have been long term. He might have been capable of that. I like that selection a lot, actually.
So I'm going to throw something at you. Unprompted, Barry Rose. Maybe we make this a poll question in our group, Breaking Kayfabe with Badger and Barry. And if you're not a member, quite frankly, what the hell are you doing here? Barry Rose, best bully heel. Okay? That if you're in a situation, this is the guy that's going to scare you the most. Bill Watts, Buddy Colt, Ole Anderson, Johnny Valentine, or the Assassin. 5 choices. Who scares you the most, Barry Rose?
I think Watts does.
Yeah.
I actually there was just something about when Watts was on, you just knew you would get your ass kicked. Like he came across as the guy. He came across as like Buford Pusser, right? Carrying the tube, He just was a scary motherfucker. Bill Watts, I think. The Assassin was a little more finely tuned, a little more sinister in some ways. Johnny Valentine, sinister also in the sense that didn't have to say a lot, had like this steely glint. Ole and Buddy
That's
Cole,
an excellent use of the word steely glint, by the way, Barry Rose.
Very good, right? Very good. Colt and Ole are probably the 2 closest together in traditional bully heels. But Watts, he would have scared the shit out of me. He really was something else back in his day.
All right, Barry Rose, now let's transition smoothly as always. Barry Rose, we have not in a hot tick done Florida Man or not. Are you ready, Barry Rose?
I am sitting down, Jeff.
Once
All ready
again,
for this.
shout out to our man David Edelman for always supplying me with the great Florida Man stories. And I would encourage any of you in the group, if you got a good potential Florida Man or not story, send them to me. Once again, no deaths. We don't do deaths here. No like animal cruelty cases, because that's a big laugh a minute. So none of that kind of stuff. Just quirky, out there stuff like this one, Barry Rose. Barry Rose, man arrested after nude photos found displayed at grocery store. The story goes, a man is accused of revenge porn after multiple nude images of a woman were found in public areas throughout a local grocery store. On August 3rd, officers responded to the store. According to the arrest report, the photos, which were printed on postcard-style paper, were placed in a location accessible to the general public, including children. They were found in the child seating areas of a shopping cart, the men's restroom, the soda aisle, and an outdoor merchandise bin. The victim confirmed the images were private photographs previously shared only with the defendant during their relationship and did not give consent, go figure, for the photos to be displayed or distributed or publicly displayed. Barry Rose, little revenge porn by posting the naked photos of the girlfriend you just broke up with in Publix. Barry Rose, Florida Man or not?
Unbelievable story too, and the stupidity of people. Because this is all felonies, right? Like this is serious shit. Yeah, idiots. I'm going to say this is Florida. I mean, this clearly seems like a Pasco County type of offense, a Newport Richey, Holiday, Hudson type of event. So I'm going to say yes, this occurred in the state of Florida.
Well, I did spoil a little bit, although they're located in more than one state. I mentioned Publix at the end. Yeah. However, Barry Rose, you were wrong in the county because it's Brevard County, Barry Rose. It's Satellite Beach. So
wow.
Shout out to all our friends in Satellite Beach.
Yeah.
Well, they'll see.
But surfing in Satellite Beach, Jeff. They actually get waves on their beaches. So yeah.
Yes, the next story, Barry Rose. Let's see here. I got. Excuse me, Barry Rose at my advanced age. On this one, I have to go to the cheaters. The story goes: Barry Rose, IHOP waitress charged with customer grope. Who among us doesn't like a good customer grope? An IHOP waitress was accused of sexual harassment of a female customer after she rubbed the 51-year-old woman's back, breast, and arm after sitting next to her in a restaurant booth. Investigators allege that Allie Mae Wright, a 26-year-old server, not manager, Barry, at a local IHOP, was waiting on a patron when she, quote, began to call the victim a, quote, sexy cunt. Barry Rose, always classy, gave her a milkshake that was not ordered. Just trying to pick the woman up at IHOP, for God's sakes. Barry Rose, Florida woman or not.
I mean, you're 51 years old. I guess she wasn't a lesbian, because if you're 51 and a 26-year-old is flattering you with calling you a sexy cunt,
she's giving you a
take that
milkshake. She's calling you a sexy cunt. I mean, what more could you ask for?
Wow. Again, this screams Pasco County as well. I'm gonna say Florida as well.
St. Petersburg, Florida, Barry Rose. You are 2-0. What's the county for St. Pete, Barry?
I think it's Hillsborough County.
Yeah, there you go.
Or Pinellas. It's Pinellas, if I'm correct. I think it's Pinellas County.
All right, Barry Rose. This one, I'm sorry, I do not have. Well, let's see. Wait a minute.
I want to tap out. I'm 2 for 2 at this point.
Well, you're doing good here. This one, I just have the headline, Barry Rose. I wanted to share the headline with you, Barry. Serial butt sniffer arrested. Khalees Crowder, a 38-year-old registered sex offender who's also known as a serial butt sniffer, has been arrested for the second time in 2 months. Let's see if I get more here out of this. No, I can't. Barry Rose, the suspected serial butt sniffer, however, was not from Pasco County, was not from Brevard, he was not from Port. This is Burbank, California, Barry Rose. They have serial butt sniffers there. So let's see here. I have one more story for you, Barry Rose, as we begin to wrap up. Man who was married to 3 women at the same time was sentenced for felony bigamy. Barry Rose, Henry Betsy, married 3 women he met on dating websites in 3 different counties over a 2-year period. Never got a divorce, never got an annulment. I'm going to take the cheaters out again, Barry Rose. See, this is a thing that people never knew about us when we were just on the audio podcast. Let's see. He goes back to court, pled guilty to bigamy. The story that was great, though, Barry, was as he entered the plea, the judge revoked the bail. He showed up in court with his new girlfriend, Barry Rose. He's got 3 wives, shows up to court for the sentencing with his new girlfriend. Let's give him some love for the just the stones for showing up to court. Barry Rose, Florida man or not?
I'm going to say not Florida on this one.
See, Barry Rose, you are riding that wave because you're riding those waves in the Gulf of Mexico. And this time, unfortunately for you, the wave broke, Barry Rose, because this is Florida man. This is, oh, damn it, I lost the feed here. Let me get it back. See where he's located in Florida. This was Brooksville, Florida, Barry Rose. I don't know what.
Home of Scott McGee.
Yep, there you go. I'm trying to figure out.
Campus suburb. Was it Scott McGee?
Hernando County, Barry Rose.
Hernando County. Yeah.
So Barry Rose, that'll about put the wraps on this particular episode. I did want to say to all the folks out there that we really appreciate you listening. Want to remind you, our Patreon episodes are still out there. So that, we've got, over 30 episodes, Barry Rose, interviews with some of the legends of pro wrestling that you can still access. $5 a month, Barry Rose. If you haven't yet checked out those episodes, we encourage you to go back. We have so much great content besides the regular episodes that are still available for you to access. With the good folks at the Arcadian Vanguard Network, who we appreciate allowing us to use the Breaking Kayfabe with Bowdrin and Barry moniker. Barry Rose, you about ready to call a wrap on this one, my man?
Another great episode.
That's what we provide to you here. Just great episodes after great episodes. One, besides the Patreon episode, very quickly, I will mention. I know Barry didn't see it. I personally did not watch it. Two thoughts about AEW and what they're doing right now. First of all, there was the bit at the end. I watched AEW Dynamite last night at the time of this recording. John Moxley had a great match with Daniel Garcia, but there was something that happened on the pay per view where he takes a screwdriver, Barry, and puts the screwdriver in Darby Allin's ear. Uh, why? What? That's just so unnecessary. You know that they have so much talent on that roster that they can do so much with, and that they do this shit with the thumbtacks and all the screwdriver in the ear. Ridiculous. But I do want to tell you, Barry, there's one tag team that we have going out of our way to kind of give crap to when they deserve it. The run the Young Bucks are on now, as the former EVPs that are now being degraded every time they show up. They had them come to the ring, Barry Rose, and first of all, they don't introduce them as the Young Bucks. They call them Matt and Nick, or they call them by whatever the first name was when they were first a tag team. They call them Todd and what's the other kid's name on The Simpsons? Rod and Todd, something like that. But they had them come out, and when they hit their intro music, they hit Bop by what's God, who did
Hanson.
Hanson, yeah. And and they were like walking to the ring, going, "What is this?" Yeah, and it's it's the best stuff I've seen the Young Bucks do in AEW as heels. It's really good stuff as the fallen EVPs. Shout out to the Young Bucks, really enjoying that stuff. And on that note, Barry Rose, this is the wrap on episode 3. Any last minute additions to the roster for the next CWF Legends Fan Fest that you want to announce at this point, Barry Rose?
We are this close to signing a major name, a former world champion. We just have to get the everything, the I's dotted and the T's crossed. So once that happens, this will be announced. We'll break it here, hopefully on the next episode.
Okay. I want to also tell you one of the things that Barry and I talked about as we mentioned stuff we could do on this show, guests we could have. I can tell you that Barry and I are in secret negotiations, in fact, to have someone who will be appearing at the CWF Legends Fan Fest as a guest here on this show to not only promote the Barry's Fan Fest along with Nick Massey, but to discuss his career at some point. That will be before the Fan Fest again. I've got to get all the I's dotted, T's crossed, that kind of stuff, but that's something to look forward to. But we are going to have a member of our Breaking Kayfabe with Bowdrin and Barry group to come on, join us to discuss his wrestling fandom, to discuss how he became a fan, what first got him into it, who he enjoyed watching, maybe some of that kind of stuff. And it's something that if we get enough positive reaction to it from not only the group, but from other people, we will have more of you on to discuss how you became a wrestling fan, what got you to this point, and by God, how you discovered Bowdrin and Barry. So Barry Rose, on that note, we are still, boom, we made it under an hour like we always talked about, Barry. Until next time, Barry Rose, my man, have a good day. Go surf those waves. Outie!